Before colonialism, many African societies did not treat the female body with Victorian shame. Across much of pre-colonial Africa, the human body carried meanings very different from those imposed later by European colonialism and missionary Christianity. In many indigenous African societies, partial nudity was neither automatically sexual nor morally scandalous. Women could breastfeed publicly, farm, trade, dance, or move through communal spaces with parts of the body exposed without the intense sexual interpretation common in modern global culture. Early photographs from parts of Southern, Central, Eastern, and West Africa show women dressed in ways that shocked European missionaries, yet were entirely normal within their own cultural worlds. This does not mean sexuality did not exist. It does not mean African men lacked desire. Nor does it mean all African societies were identical. Africa contained thousands of cultures with different customs, moral systems, and dress codes. But it does challenge a modern assumption many people unconsciously carry, that the exposed female body is inherently obscene or automatically sexual. That assumption is not universal. It is historical and cultural. The colonial reordering of the African body. European colonialism did not merely conquer land. It also attempted to reorganize African consciousness. Missionaries and colonial administrators frequently viewed African dress practices through the lens of Victorian morality, a worldview that strongly associated modesty with civilization and bodily exposure with primitiveness or sin. Indigenous clothing systems were often condemned as immoral, backward, or uncivilized. Colonial schools and churches became instruments for reshaping African attitudes toward the body, sexuality, gender, and public behavior. Covering the body increasingly became linked to respectability, education, Christianity, and modernity. Over time, many Africans internalized these imported standards, sometimes viewing their own ancestral practices through European moral categories. This historical process is well documented across several colonized societies, not only in Africa but also in parts of Oceania, Asia, and the Americas. Nudity does not mean sexual availability. One of the biggest distortions in modern discourse is the assumption that less clothing automatically equals sexual invitation. Anthropologists have long observed that societies interpret the body differently. In some traditional communities, exposed breasts were understood primarily through functions like motherhood, adulthood, fertility, labor, or identity, not necessarily eroticism. Meanwhile, modern industrial societies often commercialize the body intensely while simultaneously claiming to defend modesty. This contradiction matters. A society can cover women completely and still objectify them through advertising, pornography, trafficking, entertainment industries, and consumer culture. Likewise, a society with more relaxed attitudes toward bodily exposure may not automatically reduce women to sexual commodities. The issue is not merely how much skin is visible. The issue is how culture trains people to interpret what they see. Ancient African civilizations and the human form. In ancient Kemet, Egypt, art frequently portrayed both men and women with partially exposed bodies in ways that emphasized beauty, fertility, power, lineage, or spirituality rather than shame. Royal and divine imagery often reflected symbolic ideals rather than the puritanical standards later introduced under colonial Christianity. Similarly, historical accounts from parts of southern Africa, including some Zulu communities during earlier periods, describe forms of dress that Europeans considered immodest but locals did not necessarily interpret sexually. Comparable patterns also existed in parts of Melanesia and other indigenous societies worldwide before missionary intervention reshaped cultural norms. Again, none of this means those societies were utopias. Patriarchy, hierarchy, and gender restrictions existed in many places. History should not be romanticized. But it does mean modern assumptions about shame and the body are not timeless truths. The modern crisis, commodification of the body. Ironically, the modern world often confuses sexual repression with moral advancement. Global commercial culture, through advertising, celebrity industries, pornography, social media algorithms, and entertainment, has transformed the human body into a market product. Women's bodies especially are frequently packaged for attention, profit, and consumption. This form of objectification differs from many indigenous systems where bodily exposure could exist without the same commercial sexualization. Colonial morality and capitalist media together created a strange paradox. The body became more covered, yet also more commodified. Re-examining cultural assumptions. To question colonial influence on African attitudes toward the body is not to advocate nudity or reject all modern values. It is simply to recognize that ideas about modesty, shame, and sexuality are historically conditioned rather than universally fixed. Many Africans today defend imported Victorian norms without realizing those norms were themselves products of a specific European religious and historical context. Understanding this history allows for a more honest conversation about identity, morality, culture, and the lingering psychological effects of colonialism. The deeper question is not whether bodies should be covered or uncovered. The deeper question is, who taught us to see the human body the way we do? Like and share this video. Follow the Rational Heart podcast for more.